So Jesus stands silent before Pilate. Jesus stands silent before Pilate in a sort of a court. Pilate has the power to have him tortured and killed as Jesus' own people accuse him falsely. Pilate is amazed that Jesus remains silent. There's so little silence in our world in any moment. 2014, there was a study done by the University of Virginia. They did 11 experiments in which they put people in a room alone for 15 minutes. And there was no other person, no telephone, no screen, no book, no magazine, nothing. The only thing in the room with them was a little button. And they'd been wired up first. And if they so chose, they could push the little button and receive an electric shock. How many people chose the shock? Well, more than half. 2/3 of the men, 1/4 of the women would rather be shocked. They couldn't take sitting in silence for 15 minutes. Pascal said, even a couple hundred years ago, silence. All human unhappiness comes from not knowing how to stay quietly in a room. Jesus, take all of that, multiply it exponentially. A moment where he's being falsely accused, where the illusions and the delusions and the arrogance and the lies and all the rest are being projected on him. Why does he do this? What does it take for him to do this? How does he stand self-assured, self-possessed, unafraid, not cowed down, not trembling, head high, posture calm? The first clue Matthew gives us is in the way that Pilate is talked about. So Jesus stood in front, Matthew says, so Jesus stood in front of the governor. In front of the governor. At first, Pilate isn't named for us. Jesus stood in front of the governor. "Are you the king of the Jews?" the governor asked him. "If you say so," replied Jesus. The only thing he says, "If you say so." He does speak to Pilate. He doesn't speak in a minute, but he does at first speak to Pilate. But notice how that goes. First of all, governor is, in that context and in that moment, a relatively mild term for power, for someone in a role of power or all that power could mean in that society. Governor's a pretty mild term. Matthew uses this word 10 times. In the book of Acts, when Paul's off dealing with the Romans and bumping into them all the time, it gets used 6 times. Luke in his gospel uses it twice. Anywhere else in the New Testament it's used once or none. Once or none. Matthew's speaking to Jews. He understands that the question of how did these people get in power is very real for his people. How did these Roman people get in power over us? A very real question. So he uses this term, the governor, because the governor isn't really much of a compliment in this sense. The governor is, think about, I was told as a kid that school buses in that day had governors on the engines. And what that meant was they could only get so fast. They had a limit. The governor is given the role of keeping order. It's not actually all that exciting a job to have when thought about that way. It's a limit. He's limited in his power. He's derivative of the whole system. Pilate is actually a rather pathetic, sad guy, and Jesus knows it. Pilate is stuck in a false self. He's stuck in this whole Roman hierarchy of expedience and this hierarchy of having to do this for them and that for all the rest and everything else, and just keeping things orderly or those above him get on his case. Pilate's not in a happy place. And he's not a real, developed, true person. So Matthew has Jesus, Matthew describes Pilate as the governor because there is a mystery. There's a mystery in Romans 13 that Romans 13, that God somehow allows these empires to have their day. But God reserves the right to judge them as well. He somehow allows them, but he doesn't delay. You're in the system, we've let it be. He's not defending himself. He's not afraid of Pilate. He's not overawed by Pilate. So, Pilate then turns to Jesus' own people, the ones who especially do hate him. Jesus has done exactly what technically they want him to have done. He has kept the law. Jesus has not violated the law. Jesus is innocent, but they're furious with Jesus because he's done that thing that's worse than break the written thing, which is to break the actual spirit of it all, the cultural norms that are stronger for not being written. They're so strong that nobody thinks you need to write them. Nobody would ever think of doing that. Jesus says, no, you've got the whole thing wrong. And he's been saying this for these 3 years. And he's been saying to them, no, you got the whole spirit of this wrong. You just don't get it. And so they're ashamed. They're just indignantly offended. And they hate him, vehemently hate him. And so now they speak up. They begin to speak. Chief priests, the elders, poured out their accusations against him. And now Jesus makes no answer of any kind. Matthew switches for a moment, and he names the governor. For just a moment, just a little peek, we see Pilate as a real person. Then Pilate said to him, "Don't you hear all this evidence they're bringing against you?" Matthew lets Pilate be a real person because he has a kind of an empathetic moment with Jesus for a second, like, you in front of me, I'm not convinced you're guilty. Aren't you going to do something here? Aren't you going to speak up? But Matthew quickly switches back. Jesus gave him no answer, not even a word, which quite astonished or greatly amazed the governor. How can you remain quiet, silent, in the face of all this? To be clear, Jesus will deal with the Roman Empire. In John's version of this story, when Jesus says to Pilate, "My kingdom is not of this world," Jesus does not mean my kingdom floats up there in the heavenlies somewhere and never touches ground in real issues. That is not what he means. He means my kingdom isn't ordered the same way empires order life. My kingdom is ordered in a different way. That's what Jesus means. But that's not for today. For today, Jesus is saying, for today, for now, this part of the story, we're going to get to the root. We're going to get under the cause of it all. We're going to make a start at the very root of making a new humanity. And then that new humanity of new people will make communities of new humanity, which will affect, like yeast in dough, the world and the societies and the spaces in which they live, and it'll go out and it'll go forward and it'll go on and on and on. So why then does Jesus remain in silence? Jesus is taking on and be at peace. Jesus knows that we are not in our deepest self in peace with God. He knows that we're not in our deepest self in peace with ourselves. He knows how many of our relationships are broken and how many people we wish we could tell off or justify ourselves to or just send away somewhere and have them poof into nothing and not actually have to kill them, even though we just rather they be gone. He knows all these feelings we have that we don't share with anybody. Jesus knows that our systems of the world are a mess, that trodden down the poor and that act unjustly and let injustices pass. He knows that we are in a terribly broken communion with nature around us. And in this moment, Jesus stands in for each and every one of us, for all and each of humanity. And he remains silent in order that these things that are cast, which we have done and then some, we as humanity writ large, fall on him, the human being remade. He stands in this moment as the human being. And from this moment, he will then go forward representing all of us. He's been doing it all along, but he especially do it here as the human being. And because he can get under it all, if you will, he can reset in himself the human being. He can reset our connection to God. He can reset our sense of being beloved and known and meant to have been because God dreamed us up. He can give us the ability through the forgiveness he gives us to relate to one another. He can give us the ability in a new community of love to begin to reorder life in a different way. He can give us wonder and gratitude with which to see the world which he has made, nature around us, and to relate to it in a way of out of love. He has known all along that this moment was coming. In John's gospel, Jesus refers to this moment as his hour. My hour is not yet. My hour is coming. In Mark's gospel, there's a moment where he turns his face to Jerusalem and he begins walking to Jerusalem. And everyone around him says, "What do you think you're doing? You know what's going to happen if you go there." And he does know what's going to happen when he goes there. And that is why he goes there. So Jesus remains silent before Pilate. This is the last thing. There's 7 times in Matthew's gospel when someone is amazed. All right? Now, we all know 7's the magic number in the Bible, number of wholeness. Matthew's well aware of this. He's writing to Jews. He's not making stuff up. He can just use other words if he wants to. So he 7 times chooses to make sure to use the word amazed because he wants to make a point about a wholeness of amazement. All 7 of these are moments when Jesus' presence, his life, his being, his work, his words, when Jesus' presence are resetting what it means to be the human being. To be a human being. They're resetting, and they're having these ripple effects. One of them is about his healings. He heals. He says that the crippled are made healthy, the lame are walking, the blind are seeing. He's making us whole in our bodies again, and people are amazed. Another one, he casts out demons, and he resets our relationship to the spiritual realm, and people are amazed. In another one, he tells the sea, "Hey, it's okay. I'm the prophet here. It's all right. I'm going. I'm doing what I'm supposed to do, so be at peace. Storm, die down. You don't need to stop me like you did with Jonah." He's reconnecting our relationship to nature, the world God made around us. There's 3 of the 7. 2 of the 7 we might call prophetic. One of them is when he gets cornered about the coin, and they're trying to ask him and get him in trouble about Caesar and all the rest. And he gives this enigmatic, prophetic answer about God's power mysteriously, again, allowing but not approving, and that even Caesar will be judged. And this whole thing about humans being created in God's image, and everybody just goes, "Oh, wow, didn't see that coming." The other prophetic one is when he prophetically puts judgment on the fig tree, and that little fig tree stands in as an image for his people and how they haven't kept the plot and how they haven't stayed with God and worked to be the blessing to the world that they were meant to be. Prophetic moments where Jesus is speaking again of the resetting of what we're meant to be. And there's this one. This is the last one, where Pilate just cannot believe that this man before him would remain silent. Pilate has done this before. he can tell, and he knows something's different with this guy. There's a different spirit. And Pilate doesn't believe this guy's really guilty. And his wife, on top of that, says, ooh, don't deal with this. This is not good. This is like something's going on here. Pilate knows. And he stands amazed. The first of the 7 moments in Matthew when people are amazed is unique. The first one is when the centurion comes to Jesus and he wants Jesus to speak and heal his child. And he says, Lord, I'm not worthy to have you come under my roof, but only say the word and my servant will be healed, for I too am a man under authority. And who's amazed in that moment? Who is it that's amazed in that one? It's Jesus. Jesus is the one who's amazed. Matthew says, when Jesus heard this, he was amazed. And Jesus is amazed because someone recognizes that he has authority. Authority, the root of the word is the same as to author, to write. We're told in Colossians chapter 1 that all things were made by him, for him, through him. Jesus has authored life. He's authored creation, and he's authoring a story of the human being made new. And that centurion saw enough to get it. And he said, this man has authority somehow to speak and to make things well and right and as they should be, and as it were to get under it all and make it grow up new. And Jesus is amazed that the man can see that. Jesus, friends, can remain silent in this moment. Indeed, he is determined to remain silent in this moment because it's necessary that he die for us in order that all might be renewed from the inside out, in order that he might author anew. And so he does it. He does it. Friends, this is a somber Sunday in the church's calendar, for sure. Nonetheless, we have the opportunity this morning to amaze Jesus. We have the opportunity to amaze Jesus by believing that he has authority to know us, to love us, to care for us, and to speak new life into our lives, to forgive us, to let us make a new start. We're going to be in silence for a few minutes and just invite you to thank Jesus for walking to Jerusalem, for going to the cross, for remaining silent before the governor, and then amaze him if you can, as much as you can. Say, you have authority, I believe you.